She heard the name before she saw the woman. Denny. Warm. Familiar. The kind of name you only use when you've earned the right to. Simone turned. A woman, mid-30s, dark coat, easy confidence, had her hand on Dean's arm. Not a greeting, a habit. The touch of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. Dean's face shifted, just for a second, a micro-adjustment behind the eyes. There, then gone. He smiled, said something low. The woman glanced once at Simone, then disappeared into the gallery crowd like she'd never been there at all. "Who was that?" Simone asked, later, in the car on the way home through Fitzroy. He told her it was an old colleague. His voice was calm. His hands stayed loose on the wheel. She nodded, looked out at the dark street, said nothing more. 9 years. She thought she knew every version of him, every mood, every habit, every silence. She thought she could read him the way you read a room you've lived in so long, you stop seeing it. She'd been so certain. To understand what that moment in the gallery actually was, what it cost her, and what it would take to survive it, we need to go back to the beginning, to a rooftop in Carlton, to the night she met him. Because that's where this really started. She just didn't know it yet. Simone didn't bring it up again that night. She made tea. She watched Dean move through their kitchen the way he always did. Jacket off, shoes by the door, phone face down on the counter, everything in its place, everything exactly as it had always been. She told herself it was nothing. One woman, one touch, one name she didn't recognize. People had nicknames. Old colleagues existed. She was reading a single second like it was a sentence. And that wasn't fair to him. That wasn't fair to 9 years. She went to bed before he did. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling of their Fitzroy bedroom and did what she'd always been good at. She contained it, folded it down small, pressed it somewhere she didn't have to look at, but the name stayed. Denny. It surfaced at odd moments over the following days. In the middle of a year 10 art class, waiting for coffee, standing in the shower at 6 in the morning before the rest of the house woke up. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't say it out loud. She didn't search it. She didn't write it down. She just held it, the way you hold something sharp without quite admitting it's cutting you. Dean was attentive that week, present. He suggested dinner twice, remembered to ask about her mother. He was everything she'd always known him to be. That almost made it worse. They'd met on a rooftop in Carlton on a Friday night in February. A mutual friends exhibition. Too many people. Not enough wine, and Dean Archer standing near the edge of the building looking at the city, like he was quietly judging its layout. Simone had laughed at something he said within the first 5 minutes. He'd remembered what she ordered at the bar without asking twice. By the end of the night, they were the last 2 people on the rooftop. That was 9 years ago. They built a life in Fitzroy the way people do when they're certain. Slowly, deliberately, with the quiet confidence of 2 people who've stopped looking for alternatives. The terrace house on Rose Street. The shared bookshelf they'd never quite organized. Sunday mornings at the same cafe on Smith Street, without ever having to discuss it. Dean's work had always come with irregularity. Architecture did that. Site visits, interstate clients, weeks that stretched without warning. Simone's teaching schedule was the anchor. She'd always been the one who kept the rhythm of the household. He moved around it. She'd never once resented that. She'd seen it as balance. Partnership, the natural shape of 2 people fitting together. His absences had never frightened her. They'd always come with explanations, and the explanations had always been reasonable. That was the thing about Dean. He was always reasonable. She loved that about him. She understood now what it had actually been for. It was a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the gallery. Simone was looking for her transit card and Dean's jacket, the gray one hanging by the door, the one he'd worn to a site visit the week before. She checked the inside pocket first. Nothing. Then the left outer pocket. A receipt. Dry cleaning. Pick up address on Bliss Street, Brunswick. She stood in the hallway and looked at it for a long moment. Brunswick was 12 kilometers away. Dean's studio was in Collingwood. His regular dry cleaner was 2 streets from their house. She knew that because she dropped things off there herself. Because it was their dry cleaner. The one they'd used for 7 years. She asked him that evening, casually while he was making pasta, her voice carrying nothing. He told her he dropped a suit off near a site visit. Client project up that way, easier than doubling back. Plausible, completely plausible. She nodded, said that made sense. Poured herself a glass of water, but something in her, quiet and precise, the part of her that noticed things, the part she'd been trained since childhood to distrust, didn't let it go. She went back to the jacket after dinner. She took the receipt out again, looked at the address, looked at the date. Then she took a photograph of it on her phone, folded it back exactly as she'd found it, and returned it to the pocket. She didn't know why she did that. Not yet. A few days later, Simone mentioned Brunswick at breakfast. Casually. No agenda. She said a colleague had recommended a cafe up that way, somewhere on Sydney Road, and that she might drive up one afternoon that week. Dean looked up from his coffee. Just briefly. Then he named 2 places closer to home. Rattled them off easily, naturally, like a man who simply knew good cafes. Said the parking up on Sydney Road was a nightmare. Said she'd be better off saving herself the trip. She didn't go to Brunswick. She didn't think much of it at the time. It was only later, weeks later, that she'd replay that breakfast and understand what had actually happened. How smoothly it had gone. How little resistance she'd offered. This second moment was harder to sit with. She brought up the gallery woman again. Once, carefully, on a Sunday evening. Not accusatory, just honest. Told him the interaction had stayed with her, that something about it hadn't felt right. He set down his book. He looked at her with something close to patience, the kind that carries a faint edge of exhaustion underneath it. He told her she did this sometimes, created distance where none existed, found problems in moments that didn't have any. He said it gently. He said he wasn't criticizing her. He was just being honest because that's what they did. She apologized. She actually apologized. And the moment she did, something shifted between them, something small, something she wouldn't be able to name for a long time. She didn't set out to start a list. It just became one. The first entry was the dry cleaning receipt. The second was a parking fine she found while filing their shared paperwork in late April, issued on a street in Brunswick on a Wednesday afternoon. Dean had told her that Wednesday he was at a client meeting in South Yarra. She remembered because she texted him lunch plans, and he'd replied that he was stuck across town. The third was a dinner charge on their joint card. A restaurant she didn't recognize. Italian, mid-range, a Tuesday night. She checked his calendar. Nothing listed. She checked her own memory. She'd been at her sister's that night. She'd assumed he'd eaten at the studio. The fourth was a contact in his phone. She wasn't searching. She picked it up to check a shared calendar event, and the screen was already open. A name near the top of his recent calls. Our work. Called twice in the last week. She searched the name against every colleague, every client, every professional contact she'd heard him mention across 9 years. Nothing. Each piece was still small, still deniable. A parking fine proved nothing. A dinner for one could look like a dinner for 2 on a receipt. A contact with an initial wasn't a confession, but she was a person who taught students to look at a canvas and find the composition underneath. To see not just what was there, but what it was arranged to do. She was starting to see the arrangement. She almost told her friend Carla everything. They were at Carla's kitchen table in Northcote on a Thursday evening, a bottle of red open between them, the kind of night that had always made honesty easy. Simone got as far as the dry cleaning receipt, got as far as saying Dean's name in a way that made Carla put her glass down. Then she stopped. She heard herself, really heard herself. A woman sitting in her friend's kitchen describing parking fines and phone contacts, and a stranger's hand on her husband's arm at a gallery. A woman who'd photographed a dry cleaning receipt and saved it on her phone like evidence of something she couldn't even name. She sounded paranoid. She sounded like the kind of person who dismantled a marriage over a nickname. She changed the subject, smoothly, redirected to Carla's work situation, and kept it there for the rest of the evening. On the drive home through Fitzroy, she gripped the wheel and had a quiet argument with herself. 9 years. No lies she could prove. No confession. No confrontation. Just a list of small things that could each be explained away by a reasonable person in under 30 seconds. Dean had always called her perceptive. He'd also called her tendency to overanalyze a flaw. Gently, always gently, but consistently. She'd accepted that about herself, filed it under things to manage. Now she wasn't sure which version of herself to trust. The one who was reading too much into nothing, or the one who thought to photograph the receipt. She ran into Renata Cross on a Wednesday morning, a school supply shop in Collingwood, the kind of place Simone visited twice a term for art materials. She was comparing sketchbook weights near the back when she heard her name. Renata was at the end of the aisle, basket in hand, genuinely pleased to see her. They'd met a handful of times over the years. Dean's colleague, warm enough woman, the kind of person who remembered small details. Asked after Simone's mother. Mentioned she'd heard good things about the school's art program. The conversation was easy for the first few minutes. Then Renata said it. She mentioned she hadn't seen much of Dean at the studio lately. Said he seemed to be splitting his time these days. That it was hard to keep track of where he was on any given week. She laughed lightly when she said it, the laugh of someone making idle conversation. Then she looked at Simone with an expression that lasted just a beat too long. It was the expression of a person who'd assumed they were confirming something already known and had just registered too late that they weren't. Renata moved the conversation on quickly, said something about the weather, asked about the end of term. Simone smiled through all of it, answered everything, said it was lovely to run into her. She walked to her car, put the sketchbooks in the back seat, and sat with both hands in her lap. Splitting his time. The drive home was very quiet. She started on a Sunday morning while Dean was at a site visit. She made coffee first, sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop like she was marking student work. Then she pulled up the parking fine. She'd kept a photo of it and typed the street name into a property search database. Blythe Street, Brunswick. She cross-referenced the dry cleaning address. Same street, different end. She narrowed the search to the specific block, pulled up the listed properties. One came back with a registered lease, recent active, 2-year term. The lessee name wasn't Dean's. She wrote it down anyway. Then she went back to the dinner charge, cross-referenced the date against Dean's calendar. She still had shared access, had never thought to question it. The calendar showed nothing. No entry, no client, no excuse prepared for a Tuesday night in March. She checked the restaurant's location, Brunswick. She sat with that for a long moment. Then she opened the architecture industry directory she'd found on his bookshelf once, a professional listing he'd been included in 4 years ago. She searched his firm, found the Brunswick reference she half remembered seeing weeks earlier, a collaborative studio space, his firm listed as an occasional user. She felt something loosen briefly in her chest. Then she checked the listing's last updated date, 3 years ago. She closed the laptop, finished her coffee, washed the cup and put it away. She didn't let herself feel anything yet. There was still one thing left to check. The studio listing stopped her for 4 days. She knew it was 3 years old. She knew the Brunswick address it referenced was 2 streets away from the dry cleaning receipt. She knew the gap between those 2 facts was not nothing. But she needed it to be nothing. So she let herself believe it. She told herself the listing was outdated, but the arrangement wasn't. That firms kept informal studio arrangements running long after the paperwork lapsed. That Brunswick was simply a work pocket she hadn't known about. That Renata's comment meant nothing more than a busy schedule and a colleague who didn't track everyone's whereabouts. She was warmer with Dean that week, more present. She suggested the Sunday Cafe on Smith Street, and they went together like they always had. Newspapers, two long blacks, the easy quiet of people who don't need to fill every silence. She watched him across the table and felt something close to relief. She'd been doing it again, what he'd always said she did, manufacturing distance, turning small things into shapes they didn't have. She almost deleted the photographs from her phone. Almost. On the fourth evening, she went back to the property database. She wasn't sure why, some part of her that refused to fully rest. She pulled up the Brunswick listing one more time and looked at the lessee name she'd written down. Then, she typed it into a general search. The results loaded slowly, and the relief she'd been carefully holding together came apart in her hands. She drove to Brunswick on a Tuesday afternoon. She told herself she was just looking, that she'd drive past, see nothing, and finally put it to rest. She took the long way, through Collingwood, up Alexandra Parade, across into Brunswick like she was running an errand. She parked across the street from the Blythe Street address, and 2:30. The house was a double-fronted Victorian, well-kept, window boxes, a bicycle leaning against the side fence, the kind of house that looked lived in, genuinely, warmly lived in, by people who'd made it a home. She sat in the car and watched. At 3:10, Dean's car turned into the street. She knew the sound of that engine. She'd know it anywhere. He parked 2 houses down, got out, and then the passenger door opened. A woman, mid-30s, dark hair, relaxed posture, carrying 2 grocery bags like she'd done it 1,000 times before. She said something over the roof of the car, and Dean laughed, easy, unguarded, the laugh Simone hadn't heard in longer than she could pinpoint. The woman reached the front door first, took out her own key, opened it without hesitating. Dean followed her inside. The door closed. Simone sat very still across the street. This wasn't an affair. Affairs had hotels, hushed phone calls, guilt visible at the edges. This was a home, a life. A woman with her own key and grocery bags and 9 years of Tuesday afternoons. Every absence recalculated instantly. Every site visit, every late night, every reasonable explanation, all of it at once. She didn't confront him that night, or the next. She went home, made dinner, sat across from Dean at the table they'd eaten at for 9 years, and listened to him talk about a client brief and said the right things at the right moments and gave nothing away. Then she started digging. It took her 6 days. Methodical, quiet, the kind of focus she usually reserved for preparing a major exhibition. She searched the lessee name from the property database, cross-referenced it with Dean's professional history, searched the name alongside his firm, his suburb, his industry. Ingrid Maurer, 39, interior designer, Brunswick. She found a professional profile first, then a LinkedIn connection, mutual, through Dean's firm. Then a photograph from a design industry event 3 years ago. Dean was in the background, half turned toward the camera, standing 6 feet from Ingrid, standing 6 feet from Simone. The same event, the same room, the same evening Simone remembered as a rare night out together. She pulled their photo albums from the shelf, the physical ones, the ones from the early years. She found the photograph from that night, Dean's arm around her shoulder, both of them smiling. Ingrid Maurer was visible in the background, clear as anything. She'd been there the whole time. Simone sat down on the floor of the hallway with the album open in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't move. She just sat with the photograph and felt 9 years rearrange themselves around a truth she couldn't unknow. Then one more detail surfaced. Cold and quiet and worse than all the rest, Ingrid had met Dean's mother. So had Simo. She called Dean's mother on a Thursday morning. Barbara Archer, 71, a quiet woman who lived in a neat brick house in Bowen and had always been perfectly pleasant to Simone across 9 years of Christmas lunches and birthday dinners, and the occasional Sunday visit. The call lasted 9 minutes. Simone didn't accuse. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said she needed to ask something directly and that she needed an honest answer. The silence on the other end lasted long enough to be its own answer. Barbara didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either, not in words. She said it wasn't her place, said some things between a husband and wife needed to stay between them, said she hoped Simone would find a way through. Simone thanked her and hung up. She sat in the kitchen and looked at the room around her. The bookshelf they'd never organized, the coffee cups on the second shelf, the ones Dean had bought at a market in Fitzroy the year they moved in, the framed print above the fireplace she'd chosen and he pretended to like until he genuinely did. She started counting backwards. Every trip she'd taken without him, the interstate conferences, the school retreats, the long weekends with friends he'd always warmly encouraged. She'd seen them as independence, as trust, as the breathing room a healthy relationship allowed. He had engineered every one of them, not cruelly, carefully, the way an architect engineers load-bearing walls, so the structure holds, and no one thinks to question what's keeping it up. She didn't recognize the last 9 years anymore. She called a solicitor on a Friday morning, a woman recommended by a colleague, someone who handled family law, who'd seen situations like this before and didn't flinch at the details. The marital home on Rose Street was jointly owned. Dean couldn't move against it unilaterally. That was the first thing Simone needed to know, and it steadied her. The second thing was harder. The solicitor requested a financial audit. Standard procedure in situations like this. A full picture of shared accounts, investments, outgoing transfers. Simone had assumed their finances were straightforward. They'd always managed money without tension. She trusted the arrangement, the way she trusted everything else. The audit came back 10 days later. A shared investment account she'd known about, but rarely monitored, had been drawn on regularly. Small transfers, consistently sized, routed to a separate account she had no record of ever opening. It had been happening for 4 years. The total was significant enough that when the solicitor read it out, Simone had to ask her to repeat it. She sat very still and did the arithmetic. 4 years, 48 months. The number on the page didn't feel like money. It felt like a calendar of every month she'd trusted him without question. Then Renata called. She'd clearly been thinking since Collingwood. She told Simone she wanted to help, that she had studio sign-in records, site visit logs, a pattern of logged absences that contradicted years of stated whereabouts. She said she'd suspected something for a long time and hadn't known what to do with it. She offered everything she had. The woman Simone had barely known became the most important person in the room. She reached out to Ingrid in late July, not through a lawyer, not through a mutual contact. A direct message, short, honest, no anger in it. She said she thought they should meet, that she wasn't looking for a confrontation, that she simply needed to close something she couldn't close alone. Ingrid replied within the hour. They met at a cafe in Carlton, the same suburb where Simone had stood on a rooftop 9 years ago and laughed at something Dean said within the first 5 minutes. She didn't choose the location deliberately. She realized it only when she arrived. Ingrid was already there, sitting at a corner table, hands around a coffee cup, looking like a woman who hadn't slept properly in weeks. They talked for 2 hours. Not about Dean, not mostly, about themselves, about the shapes their lives had taken around his absences, about the things each of them had quietly given up without fully noticing. Ingrid had turned down a job in Sydney 4 years ago, Simone had stopped painting somewhere in the middle of year 3 and never quite examined why. They didn't become friends. That wasn't what either of them needed. But something settled between them across that corner table in Carlton. A recognition. Two women who'd built their lives around the same carefully constructed absence and survived it. Dean contested nothing in the end. The financial evidence was too clean. Simone sold her share of the Rose Street house and moved to a smaller place in Northcote. She painted the front room white. She bought new brushes. She set up a canvas on a Tuesday afternoon and stood in front of it for a long time before she made a single mark. Then she didn't get justice. She got something quieter than that, and harder to name, and worth considerably more. She got herself back.